The archaeologists found a layer of melted ash beneath the desert that no one knows how to explain. Carbon dating places it exactly 4,500 years ago in the same region of the Dead Sea. And what they found beneath that ash challenges everything we thought we knew about the end of a civilization. 2 entire cities disappeared in less than 24 hours without leaving a trace of life, only melted debris. The oldest texts of humanity describe that moment with a precision that no invented myth could possess. What you are about to hear is not a religious legend. It is the hour-by-hour reconstruction of the last day of Sodom. And there are 3 things that happened in those final hours that will forever change the way you see time. It all begins 18 hours before the fire, with 3 strangers walking through the midday heat towards a store. It was the quietest moment of the day, and also the most decisive in the history of that doomed civilization. Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent under the oaks of Mamre when he lifted his eyes and saw them. 3 men standing in front of him, without announcement, without noise, simply appeared on the horizon of the burning desert. What Abraham did next reveals something about his character that very few ancient texts describe in such detail. He didn't wait for them to come closer. He ran to meet them, knelt down to the ground, and offered them water and rest. But what he prepared was not a simple snack. It was a full banquet with fresh bread, tender veal, and milk. While the visitors ate under the shade of the trees, Abraham stood serving them like a waiter. He still didn't fully understand who was sitting at his table, but something inside him instinctively knew. One of those 3 visitors was the Lord himself, and the other 2 were angels on a different mission. Those 2 would set off that same afternoon towards the valley where Sodom and Gomorrah awaited their judgment, without knowing it yet. While Abraham was serving milk to the creator of the universe, someone in Sodom was closing a deal that would never be fulfilled. This was the first of 2 meals that would take place that day, and the differences between them explain everything. Abraham's table was under the open sky, with peace, generosity, and the promise of a life that did not yet exist. One of the visitors looked at Abraham and asked him an unexpected question. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Abraham replied that she was in the tent, and then the visitor spoke the words that would change history. "Next year, at this same time, I will return, and Sarah will have given birth to a son," he declared with absolute certainty. Sarah listened from inside the tent behind the visitor, and upon hearing that, she silently laughed to herself. She was 90 years old, Abraham was close to 100, and the possibility of a child seemed physically impossible to them. The visitor responded with a question that still resonates 4,500 years after it was asked. "Is there anything too difficult for the Lord?" he asked. And in that single phrase, the entire theology of the day was summarized. At that very moment, from that very mouth, God was promising life to a barren womb and preparing a judgment. Creation and destruction happening in the same afternoon, in the same conversation, under the same shadow of the same oaks. 24 hours later, Abraham would be standing on that same hill looking east, where there had once been 2 cities. The men stood up from the table and looked towards the valley where the roofs of Sodom shone under the sun. Abraham accompanied them for a while on the road, and then God did something that the texts describe as extraordinary. He stopped, hesitated, and aloud deliberated whether or not he should reveal to Abraham what he was about to do. "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do?" said the sacred text. And the answer was no, I will not hide it. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is very great, and their sin is exceedingly grave, he declared with the solemnity of the verdict. I will go down to see if what they have done corresponds to the outcry that has reached me, and if not, I will know. The two angels continued their march toward the valley, while the Lord remained with Abraham on the hill. And what happened next is one of the most extraordinary conversations recorded in any text from antiquity. Abraham did something that no human had done before in the Bible. He argued with God, and God let him speak. 12 hours before the fire, Abraham stepped forward, did not bow, did not retreat, spoke firmly. Will you also destroy the righteous along with the wicked? He asked, and in that question was all the morality of the ancient world. Suppose there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you destroy the place and not spare it for those 50? Abraham was not questioning God's right to judge. He was appealing to God's own character. He asked him to be consistent with his own justice, that the judge of all the earth would act with true justice. And God answered, if I find 50 righteous in Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. 50 people walking with integrity in a city of thousands would be enough to save all the others. But Abraham knew the city. He knew that his nephew Lot lived there and suspected that the number would not be reached. Then he pushed again, with the deliberate humility of someone who knows exactly who they are talking to. I have dared to speak to the Lord, I who am dust and ashes, he said. And in that phrase was all his strategy. Suppose 5 out of 50 are missing. Would you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5 righteous people? God replied, I will not destroy it if I find 45. And Abraham continued to lower the number without stopping. 40, then 30, then 20, and every time Abraham reduced the number, God answered yes to mercy. The magnitude of that mercy is difficult to comprehend. God was not seeking a reason to destroy, but to save. While Abraham was negotiating on the hill, the men of Sodom began to gather in the squares as the heat set in. They did not know that a man on a hill was fighting for his survival with the only argument that could work. They did not know that their entire existence now depended on a number that decreased with each exchange of words. Finally, Abraham reached his final number, the lowest he dared to pronounce before the Creator of the universe. Oh, may the Lord not be angry, but I will speak just one more time. What if there were only 10 found there? God answered, out of love for the 10, I will not destroy it. And with that response, the conversation came to its definitive end. 10 righteous people in the whole city. That was the final threshold, the last frontier between life and fire. If 10 people in Sodom were still walking with God, every soul in that city would be forgiven that very night. Abraham stopped at 10. He didn't ask for 5. He didn't inquire about 1. Perhaps he believed that Lot and his family would reach the number. But the silence that followed that conversation is devastating, because the reader already knows what Abraham does not yet know. There are not 10 righteous people in Sodom, there are not 5, and the city will fail even at the lowest threshold. Mercy was real, the offer was genuine, and it would not be enough not because it was small, but because the city did not respond. As Abraham was returning home under the fading light, 2 angels approached the gates of Sodom. And they were about to discover exactly how far that civilization, which once seemed promising, had fallen. Everything that would happen from that moment on would occur in a single night, before the following dawn. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom at sunset and found Lot sitting at the city gate, waiting. In the ancient world, the door was not just an entrance. It was a court, a marketplace, and a place of government. The elders and leaders gathered there to judge disputes, sign contracts, and make decisions that affected everyone. Lot had a position in that city. He was not hidden in Sodom, he was integrated into its power structure. When Lot saw the two strangers, he fell to the ground with his face down and urgently insisted that they spend the night with him. The angels declined, saying they would sleep in the square, but Lot insisted with a pressure that was not hospitality. It was fear, because Lot knew exactly what happened to foreigners who spent the night exposed in that city. The angels finally accepted, and Lot took them to his house, where he prepared a meal and baked unleavened bread. This was the second meal of the day, but everything about it was different from the first, that had been held under the oaks. While Abraham's table had been a space of open heaven and generous peace, Lot's was one of closed doors and fear. Abraham had served God at his table with joy. Lot served the angels at his with a growing terror. The same day, the same bread, two completely different worlds separated by the moral value of each host. This was the last hour of peace within Sodom, and it ended with a sound that came from all directions at once. Before they went to bed, all the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded Lot's house. It was not a crowd, it was not a radical faction, it was not a marginalized group emboldened by the darkness of the night. It was the entire male population, all ages, all neighborhoods, all households gathered for a single purpose. Most people believe they know why Sodom burned, but very few have read what God himself said about it. Not in Genesis, but in the Book of Ezekiel, where the diagnosis is much more revealing and more uncomfortable to hear. This was the sin of your sister Sodom: pride, excessive food, and prosperous comfort without helping the poor. They were haughty and committed abomination before me, says the text. And in that description is the portrait of an era. The scene at Lot's door was the final eruption of a disease that had grown over entire generations. Pride, excess, idleness, and the absolute refusal to help anyone who could not return the favor received. A civilization that had criminalized compassion had logically reached its final destination without being surprised. The crowd turned against Lot and shouted, "This foreigner came to live here and now wants to be the judge of everyone." They threatened that they would treat him worse than them, and they surged forward with the force of an unrestrained crowd. The door was about to give way when the angels reached out, pulled Lot inside, and closed it. Then they struck blindly at all the men who were outside, young and old, from the closest to the farthest. The darkness fell over the entire crowd in an instant, and what happened next reveals the depth of the abyss. After being struck blind, unable to see their own hands in front of their faces, the men did not stop. They did not flee, did not scream in fear, nor did they scatter in confusion. They kept trying to find the door by groping. In total darkness, blinded by divine power, they kept pushing, they kept searching, they kept insisting on entering. The investigation was over. The angels had seen enough to know what they needed to know that night. The investigation had confirmed the irreparable. Throughout the city, there wasn't even a handful of righteous people. The clock was no longer measured in hours, it was measured in minutes, and the angels delivered the only message that mattered now. "Get out of here right now," they told him. "Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, children, daughters, anyone who is yours? Take them out of this place, because we are going to destroy it. The outcry against its people has reached the Lord, and he has sent us." The language was definitive, Not that God was considering it, not that there was time to change the course of events. We are going to destroy this place, and the verdict was not theoretical, it was operational, with a countdown that had already begun. Lot ran through the dark streets to his sons-in-law's houses and told them what was coming upon the city. Those words came from God to the angels, from the angels to Lot, from Lot to the sons-in-law. 4 links in the chain. The most reliable testimony possible in the ancient world, with God as the first link, and the sons-in-law laughed at him. They thought he was joking because the sky looked normal and the streets were quiet after the night. The markets were going to open in the morning. Destroyed by whom? Why? The old man had completely lost his mind. 2 men heard the truth from the lips of someone who had heard it from the angels, who heard it from God. And they laughed, went back to sleep, and by dawn they were dead under the ash that covered the entire plain of the Jordan. The warning was clear, the source was reliable, the evidence was overwhelming, but the sky looked absolutely normal. They simply couldn't believe that the world they lived in was going to end that very morning without any visible signs. At dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here. Leave now, or you will be destroyed along with the city's punishment," they ordered him, and what happened next is devastating. But he took a long time, the text says, 3 words that should terrify anyone who listens to them carefully. Lot knew that the fire was coming. He believed the angels. He had spent the entire night watching his city confirm its judgment. He had seen the crowd at his door, had watched how they were left blind, and continued pushing in the darkness. I had heard the verdict from the mouths of the celestial messengers, and when the time came to leave, he delayed. Then the angels took him, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. They were forcibly taken out and put outside the city because Lot could not let go of what he had to let go. The angels had to grab him by the wrist and drag him out of a building that was about to collapse. This is what mercy looks like when the clock has struck 0. Not a gentle invitation, but an urgent extraction. God did not wait for Lot to decide. God decided for him and brought him out alive while there was still time to do so. The sun was rising, Lot was running towards Zoar, and behind him the sky was about to split in half. "Escape for your life," the angel said to him. "Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains." One single mandate: don't look back, don't stop, don't slow down. Run as if everything you are depended on it. Lot asked to take refuge in Zoar, a nearby small city, and the angels agreed, but the instruction did not change. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot arrived in Zoar, and at that exact moment, what no one expected began. The Lord rained sulfur and fire from the Lord out of the heavens on Sodom and Gomorrah, says the text. It was not a lightning bolt. It was not an earthquake. It was not any phenomenon that could be classified as purely natural or coincidental. It was the fire of God with surgical precision that struck the cities, the valley, all the inhabitants, everything that grew on the land. The Hebrew word used means to turn something completely upside down, to flip it over as if it were an empty cup. The tar pits that had produced wealth for generations ignited in an instant without anyone touching them. The fields that once reminded Lot of the Lord's garden burned until they were black in a matter of minutes. The sons-in-law who had laughed were in those cities, the markets, the homes, the walls that held everything up. Everything that existed in the span of a single dawn ceased to exist, erased from history in a single moment. And then what Jesus would remember centuries later as the most concise warning he ever uttered in life occurred. But Lot's wife, who was behind him, looked back and became a pillar of salt forever there. She had escaped, she was safe, walking alongside her husband and daughters on the way to Zoar and total freedom. The angels had pulled her by the hand. She had survived the most terrifying night in the history of the ancient world. She had survived the crowd, the blindness, the warning, the forced extraction, and yet she looked back. A single turn of the head, and she became a monument, a pillar of salt standing on the edge of the destroyed valley. She was physically out of Sodom, but Sodom had not left her, her home, her neighbors, her previous life. Saved by the angels and still turned towards what God was destroying, unable to let go of the familiar forever. Jesus mentioned that moment with the briefest instruction of all the Gospels. 3 words: remember Lot's wife. Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord and looked toward the destroyed valley. And he saw that the smoke was rising from the earth like the smoke from an oven, silent, total, with no visible limits on the horizon. The markets were not open, the merchants were not trading, the children were not playing. There was no sound in the valley. Nothing from the valley, only smoke rising in a column so dense and dark that it seemed as if the earth was burning from within. A lunch, a sunset, a night, a dawn. That was all it took between paradise and permanent ashes. The people who laughed at Lot's warning were beneath that smoke that Abraham observed in complete silence. The sons-in-law who thought it was a joke were beneath that smoke that rose slowly and darkly over the horizon. The men who were groping for the door in the darkness, still insisting, were beneath that same smoke. They had all the opportunities, all the warnings, all the necessary elements to leave on time. The angels had arrived in their city, the warning had reached their ears, and they chose to stay anyway. Some because they thought it was a joke, others because they couldn't imagine their world ending that way. Others because the world looked exactly the same as always, with no crack in the ground or any sign on the horizon. The markets did not open, and that detail is what Jesus chose to preserve as a warning for all generations. Jesus said that this pattern would repeat, not with sulfur, but with the same architecture of total normality abruptly interrupted. Eating and drinking, buying and selling, sowing and building, life moving forward as if tomorrow were guaranteed. And then the day comes, not because God is cruel, but because God is just. And deferred justice is not cancelled justice. The silence of the sky does not mean acceptance of the sky. The sun that rises every morning does not mean that the fire will not fall. It means that mercy is still running, that time still exists, that the door is still open. But mercy, like any gift, can be rejected for the last time, without anyone announcing that it is the last time. Abraham negotiated with God down to 10, and God was willing to spare the whole city for the sake of 10 people. Every soul, every home, every market, every child, forgiven by 10 righteous people, and the city could not produce them. Mercy was vast, patience was real, and it was not enough, not because grace was small, but because of the city. There are 3 hidden lessons within those 24 hours that Jesus himself said would be repeated before the end. The first is the most uncomfortable. God's mercy has a time limit, although no one knows when it arrives. God did not destroy Sodom without prior warning. He came to investigate, told Abraham the plan, and allowed for negotiation. He was willing to save every life, every family, every home for 50 righteous, for 45, even for 10. He sent angels to personally extract the only family that could be saved before the verdict was carried out. He gave Lot time to warn his sons-in-law, waited all night, and let the dawn come before the fire fell. Mercy was immense, it was patient, it was generous beyond anything that city had deserved. And it had a limit, because the Apostle Peter wrote that God condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, reducing them to ashes. He turned them into an example of what will happen to the wicked, an example, a pattern, a specimen in the Museum of History. The question is never whether God is patient. He demonstrated it by negotiating with Abraham down to the lowest imaginable number. The question is whether you will still be delaying when that patience reaches the end that only God can see clearly. The second lesson is the briefest and also the most powerful of those that the text preserves with such careful narrative. When God says go, do not look back. Because looking back is not just a physical gesture, but a declaration of divided loyalty. Lot's wife was safe. She had been rescued by angelic hands and still had part of her heart in Sodom. Her house, her neighbors, her routine, her comfort, her previous life, everything the city had been for her before the fire. The city burned behind her, and she couldn't help but turn towards what she knew, because the familiar is stronger than fear. She had a free body, but her soul was still chained to what God was erasing from the map forever. Jesus used it as a warning for the end of the era in the Gospel of Luke. Remember Lot's wife, he simply said. When God tells you to let go of something, a habit, a relationship, a season, a version of yourself that has already been judged, let go. Don't look back. Don't cry for what God is taking away. Don't become a monument to what you couldn't let go. The third lesson is the one that most living people today are experiencing right now, without fully recognizing it. Lot knew the truth, believed the warning, and had seen with his own eyes how his city confirmed his own judgment. He had seen the crowd surround his house. He had seen it go blind and continue pushing into the darkness without stopping. He had heard the angels tell him to his face that the city would be destroyed before dawn that very day. And when the moment to leave arrived, he hesitated, not because he doubted the warning, but because leaving is harder than believing. The second letter of Peter calls Lot righteous, a man tormented in his upright soul by the wickedness he saw and heard. He hated the sin that surrounded him. He lamented it every day. He was not comfortable in Sodom. He was miserable in Sodom. And yet he couldn't force himself to leave. And that is the most dangerous position in the world, knowing that you should go and not going. Completely believe the warning and do not move. Have all the evidence in front of you and remain seated in the chair. Not because you disagree with the truth, but because the familiar is more powerful than the frightening when they coexist together. Even when the familiar is slowly destroying you, even when you can see the smoke on the horizon approaching. Perhaps you are in your own Sodom right now, not a city of fire and brimstone, but a situation that has already been judged. A relationship, a habit, a pattern, a life that you know God has told you to leave, and you believe it with all sincerity. You have heard the warning clearly, you have felt the conviction, and you are still sitting on it, still delaying. Still telling you that you'll go out tomorrow, that you'll resolve it next week, that there's still enough time to act. Angels are not going to come and grab your wrist, but the Holy Spirit is doing that same work right now. It is pulling, it is urging, it is pressing your conscience with the same urgency with which the angels pressed Lot's hand. He is telling you what the angels said to Lot. Get up, leave now, before you are destroyed along with what you are leaving behind.
Jet!
Stop delaying, start going out, because the sun is already rising, and the difference between going out and delaying is absolutely everything. The smoke rose like from an oven over the plain, where two cities had once existed, and an old man watched it in silence. He had eaten bread with God under the trees. Just the day before, he had argued for the life of the city to the limit. He had lowered the number to the limit he dared to mention before God, and the city did not even reach that minimum. The valley that once seemed like the Lord's garden now appeared to be the end of the world, and, in a sense, it was for all of them. Not because they were not warned, but because they did not listen. Not because mercy was not offered, but because it was rejected. In that silence, in the space between the smoke and the sky, lies the question that this story has asked for 4,000 years. It is not a question about ancient history, nor about archaeology, nor about the geography of the Dead Sea, nor about theology. It's a question about you, about this moment, about what you will do with what you just heard when time runs out. When God's patience reaches its limit, will you have already left, or will you still be delaying, waiting for one more sign? If this story made you see the past with new eyes, subscribe to continue discovering what ancient texts reveal.